R.C. Williams, Watchmen Action.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the church community as you are and as everybody is. Charlie has a big eye on the church community as well, and seeing, for lack of a better term, untapped potential, right? To mobilize and to be active in the culture, in their community, in elections, which is obviously important. What do you see I don't want to say the church's role, because we obviously know the church's role is not to engage politically as a primary role, but it does have some sense of responsibility in that sense. What does that look like tangibly nowadays in kind of the church landscape?
Great question, JoBob. And Charlie has tapped into something that I think is really important. He understands that the church's role in the culture is to set the tone. And for so many years, we've abdicated our role of leadership. Like 1 Samuel 5:8 is playing out right in front of us. God was king, and they said, no, we want a king like the human kings. And he's like, here's all the bad things that are going to happen to you when you do that. So the church has ceded its role in leading the culture, and people ask why the culture decays. It is because we have ceded our role. So the church needs to retake its rightful place, JoBob. And I'll be honest with you, church politics, like any other politics, can be messy. And there is a cultural shift happening demographically. And so young people now are really starting to ask tough questions of their elders. Why do we do these things or have these standards, but it seems like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth? One of the reasons that we created Watchmen Action is in our research. We own a research business, Sherlock. We were finding all these things, and we said there's a giant gap between great people and great tools when it comes to conservative Christians. How can we bridge that gap in a way so the church can retake its rightful place of shaping and leading the culture?
You know what? I don't want to say Charlie and I would disagree on this necessarily, but maybe have different perspectives in coming at this. My wife and I go to a church where zero political things have ever been brought up. Now, the teaching is as based, as the kids would say, as humanly possible. They don't shy away from touchy issues. They go right head first, even into the cultural issues, gay marriage, trans, talk about all that. But there's no political angle to it, and we like it like that. Now, that's not the same with a lot of other churches, and I know churches that Charlie's spoken at that have openly said, we all support Donald Trump. 99.9% of our church does too, but it's never spoken.
Right.
What in your mind is the difference? What are some of the pros and cons of either or of those strategies?
JoBob, I think what happens is that we get to a man or a movement, and this is nothing against President Trump or the MAGA movement, but when we put a man or a movement in front of God, we run into these challenges. You have to understand historically, and this is biblical, by the way, God created government. When Moses was overwhelmed and didn't know what to do, what did God do? He sent Moses' father-in-law and said, break them into tens, fives, hundreds, right? And allow these people to govern to help you. God understands our need for structure. And by the way, he has held us, me, you, as leaders in the culture to a significantly higher standard. That's Ezekiel 33:2 played out. The discussion on Watchmen, what he's saying in that verse through Ezekiel is, you are a leader, therefore I hold you to a significantly higher standard. JoBob, people think of politics as a man or a movement instead of understanding that the role of governance, 4 levels of government, self-government, church government, or family government, church government, and then civil government's supposed to be about that big. When we cede our role and we say, look, nothing political happens here. It happens every day. Most pastors don't see it because they're not engaged with the church that they pastor. What happens when you're not is that triangle turns upside down, and then civil government rules top down, which is not a constitutional republic.
I'm curious about your thoughts on this, because this is some of my, and this has been kind of an ongoing theme that we talk a lot about here, is the arts, right? I look at, I mean, you know, you look at the Bible as historical literature too, but in the sense there is, you know, it's written in a way to invoke emotion, right? And I'm a big proponent of the arts and using emotion to evoke change in a society. One of the things that I think we run into as conservatives, especially Christian conservatives, is it's difficult to show the messiness without blurring some more Christian moral standards in terms of what kind of art you're making. Where do you think there's some leeway of, you know, where, let me rephrase this. You can have a Christian message, but told in a way that I think the church may not condone. Is that something that can be accepted, do you think, widely? Does that make sense as a question?
Oh, it totally makes sense, JoBob. And as you were saying it, the thing that popped into my head is that it's something that we do when we teach. We go all over the country, we speak and we teach. And one of the things we say in our introduction is if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable, it is because you're sitting at tables that Jesus intended you to flip. We've painted Yeshua in such a way that he's this airy-fairy, everything's okay and everything. You do realize that he was hardcore. And I think we get so far away from that, JoBob, where people feel like it isn't okay to preach biblical truth. But what Jesus Christ did in the 3 years of his ministry is exactly that. He didn't hold back. And I think that we've gotten to a point where a lot of people cosplay Christianity. And I don't want to be offensive to anyone. I'm just going to tell the truth because that's what my father commands me to do.
Yeah.
People are cosplaying Christianity today in such a way where they think it's a game. They come in, they want their TED Talk, they don't want it to go too long, they want their donuts and coffee, they want their fellowship, and then they want to go sin the other 6 days. Until we get serious about what Jesus intended us to do, because I'll tell you how I look at my life every day as a believer and a leader. I don't ask what would Jesus do. My question to myself is, am I doing what he would expect me to do in bearing my cross and following him? And there are days where the answer is absolutely not. And I have to go look at that and say, thank God for grace and mercy and continue on. But JoBob, until we're serious about that conversation, and I think younger generations can handle it. As a matter of fact, I think they're hungry for leadership. And we've missed that in a generation gap. My wife and I are Generation Xers. It's our responsibility to help the younger generation understand you're heard, you're appreciated, you're accepted. Here are all the hard truths that you're going to need to understand in order to influence the culture.
And how do you do that?
So I think the first thing is we have to listen more than we talk. You know the old adage, 2 ears, 1 mouth? You should be listening more than you talk. And what we found in practice, because our kids, 2 of them are in their 30s and 1 is in her late 20s, very different school, education, everything like that. But our experiences in opening a community center in Orlando and listening to young people, when we're willing to listen, they're willing to speak. And what we found in that experience in the hood in Orlando, Florida, 2 things in a heavily black community. They were conservative and they were Christian, but no one had ever given them context to understand why they felt the way that they felt, nor did they educate them, by the way, going back to politics for a moment, that public servants work for them and not the other way around. That's where it starts.
Interesting. Structural, foundational, and civic, really. That's how that works. Well, RC, this has been great. I appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you?
Yeah, JoBob, thank you so much for having us on. Everything Watchmen Action, people can go to watchmenaction.org. Now it's plural, so it's Watchmen, M-E-N, watchmenaction.org.
Watchmen, not watchman, watchmen.
Correct.
Got it.
Watchmenaction.org. Awesome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
God bless you.